The future of music.
The future of music. The future of music.
The future of music.
The future of music.
The Future of Music podcast.
Hey there once again. Welcome. It's the Future of Music podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive in the future of music. My hatted friend. Is that even a term? I don't know if
hatted,
say
yes.
hatted. Or I have to say it that
Hatted.
way. I don't know. He's wearing a hat is what I mean. I've got Jonathan Boyd here. I am Ryan Withrow. We are stoked to have you. And John, man, I feel like we always dive in so much. We just kind of go in, and I feel like I'm missing out on critical, important parts of your life.
Super critical, man.
Just you and I bonding, not letting the time slip away as it does so often.
We haven't even had a drink yet.
And as I get older, I just think about
Precious
these
moments,
things. What have you been up to, man? How's life, John? What's up, man?
What's
give me the
not up,
skinny.
man? What's not up? Just working on too many things, trying to figure out what day it is and what hour it is. I'm surprised they even made it to the podcast today. So that's about as good as I'm doing. Definitely not shaving.
Yeah, no, that's good. And it's also, that's why hats are there too.
Yeah.
In case you forget to do anything to your hair.
It's a haircut filter.
We don't know what's going on under there.
You don't need one.
Yeah, that's good, man. You remind me, you're kind of reminding me of my roots here. I don't know why. I think it's the beard and the hat. Honestly, I'm from that Randolph, Ohio, and that inner hillbilly in me comes out every now and then. I tell my wife and I, we live obviously downtown right now, and she says every now and then, I'd say once a quarter, I think it's a quarterly thing, she'll find small things that remind her that I am from the country.
Okay.
And most of them involve when I'm playing Mud Runner on the console. Got to transport them logs, man. Got to get a big old convoy and get that going. Give me 40 acres to turn this rig around. Is also what they say, I think. But I'm excited, man. Next week, I have this trip planned, okay? This trip that I have planned is to fly from here into Akron, Ohio. Then I'm going to get in a Super Duty, because what other vehicle is there outside of Ohio than a Super Duty, with my buddy Colin. We're going to drive 6.5 hours. We're going to go all the way to Illinois. All right. And we're going to Illinois for a key reason. There are these bus races, right? These figure 8 bus races where you get 12 school buses. And then it's just you go in a figure 8. And the goal is, of course, to meet in that figure 8 center and just smash into one another. And, I'll just show you. I'll show everybody here what I'm talking about. This is my life. This is what I'm going to go travel across the world to go see. Check it out. We flipped the bus. Red flag, yellow flag, something. Sat her over. Oh.
I just like how distorted the announcer's voice is. That's the best part.
I mean, he's into it.
All
right?
Into the
that
mic.
Is, in another life. In another life, I could have been him.
Okay, man.
I don't know.
Don't kill the dream.
I still
don't kill the. So is it last man standing, the last bus to not be flipped over, or what? Last one running?
Yeah, I don't know. I've watched a lot of these videos, and specifically from this racetrack that I'm going to, and I think they lose track. I don't even think that's the point. There's too many beers in the crowd at that point. I don't think anybody notices. They do limo stunts, jet cars, the whole thing. So anyway, that's going to be my life. That's my excitement. You're talking about being busy and doing. I'm future pacing, man. I'm focused on the future goals that I have set for myself. So good. But it's good to be here, man. And it's good to see you again. And today, I think, obviously you do a lot of the recording stuff too, and have done a lot of the recording stuff in music career and music industry. But I think I live in that space. So I'm kind of excited about today just to nerd out a bit and chat on what is to come. But what should people be expecting? I haven't even really prepared you. I think I gave you the high level of what we're going over. But yeah, what are you excited about that you think they'd be excited about?
Preparing is overrated, right? Nobody likes to prepare anymore. But really, the thing that I'm most excited about talking about today, there's really two pieces to it, because Number one, it came way faster than we ever thought it would come, which is really crazy. But the other piece of it, and I'll let you sit with this a minute, we're actually going to take the studio and put it in our brains. We're going to have a studio in our brain, right? That we can do whatever we can do in the studio, but now we don't have to have a studio to do it. So I'll just leave you with that one and we'll dive into it in a second.
The brain
studio.
studio. Yeah. So you're going to have to use your brain to work the studio, just like you don't really have to use your brain too much to click subscribe and click the like button and the alert button to make sure you're alerted every time we have a new episode coming out. And also on the podcast platforms, make sure you follow. It's good to see everybody on there, and we appreciate y'all. So yeah, just like you said, John, we're talking about a little something different. So I'm so used to the life of sitting down at a desk that's ready to go to record my music, open up Cubase, open up all my plugins, get everything moving. Sure. I mean, if we just think about that, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, if we just think about that, impressive in and of itself. The fact that now I can do it all from this same setup that I'm sitting at now. It's a wonderful thing. But it's been like that for a while. And we're going to talk today about specifically Korg, the big old company, Korg, K-O-R-G. They have something called Korg Gadget, and they've had that for a while, which is this idea of like a studio that's based on the computer. But now they have Korg Gadget VR. So I'll give you a little blurb here of what you can expect here. So Korg recently announced the launch of its popular music production studio app, Korg Gadget, on VR headsets. Now, before this, it was iOS. It was Mac, obviously. But then, oddly enough, by the way, they had it on Nintendo Switch, which I don't even know how that works, but it's amazing. I'll take it. That's fine. But this is the first time this kind of software is going to be available in VR. So according to Korg, Korg Gadget VR immerses musicians in a new type of music studio where they can produce original compositions using an assortment of unique instrumental gadgets, from keyboards and drum machines to the very synths that are used everywhere, really. And obviously, each of those are updated by the developer for use with motion controls now, not just in the computer itself. So you could be hands-on in a 3D space. And that way, you kind of have like this 360-degree angle of a DAW now with Korg Gadget VR. Now, we have a little video of it at first, but before I even show you, because you haven't seen it just yet, you know that this is coming and what we're talking about. But I want to, before I give you the goods and reveal everything to you as to what that's looking like, first thoughts. I mean, we know, I think we've said like 5 times, 10 times, 25,000 times that this was coming. But what do you envision? Yeah. I guess that's a good question. Without knowing what it looks like, what is your mind's eye giving you right
so I mean, if you just imagine or Google any image of a recording studio, generally you're going to see a big mixing board, probably like a glass pane or something where you can see a live room on the other side, probably a few chairs and some speakers and things like that, other little gadgets and like preamps and knobs that you can turn and things like that. So of course, that's kind of what I'm picturing. I'm picturing like more or less a studio that obviously you put on your VR headset and you're in the studio. But I'm also imagining that you can take some pieces and move them around and kind of make your own studio. Now, I guess we'll have to see how it works here in a second because I have some opinions about, what could be the uses and functionality and benefits of that. But I'll hand it back to you first before we get to that.
Yeah, good. And I think we may be a little like spoiled in the sense that we've spoken to so many people that are in this space, in the VR space, in the music space with VR. So I think we kind of go to this idea of like a virtuoso because it's there. It's just at the forefront of the mind. But so for the people that are watching on YouTube, which if you're not, subscribe, alerts on YouTube, but you should. We'll make sure that we have the video here. It's a 2-minute video that Korg released. We're going to play it, but then we're going to go over it. So if you're not watching, it's okay. We're going to talk about it. We won't even make you sit through the 2 minutes of us not talking, you just hearing mysterious sounds. We'll get into more of the examples because I also have some audio examples that were produced from it. But let's go in. Let's take 2 minutes to take a look at Korg Gadget VR. Let's check it out. There you have it. There you go. So, for those that weren't able to watch, give me a beautiful painting. Paint a picture for me of what we just witnessed there, my friend. What were we just in? What were we there? What were we doing?
It's kind of what I said earlier, actually. Like, you're in this studio space, but instead of being set up like a normal studio where you have a control board, a big soundboard in front of you and maybe some racks off to the side, you actually kind of have like a circle around you of all these different tools. It can be a keyboard or synths or drum machines or whatever it is. I imagine you can move them and things like that. But yeah, that's pretty much kind of what we talked about.
Yeah, the thing I notice instantly too, as somebody that's always focused on one screen, and we talk about this with VR all the time, is that you kind of have infinite view at that point when you're able to look all the way around, up and down. When I'm in something like Cubase and I'm composing and I maybe just have a synth track with a keyboard, that's all I'm looking at is that one thing. However, with this, each individual instrument above it has its own monitor for composition purposes. So you've got all of the MIDI files and tracks that you can drag and drop and move all the note values on top of everything. So it's really, for me, when we think about how it is now, and we'll get more into this as we continue, when we think about now, what is a con to the process? Well, even if it's 5 seconds to switch from one view to another, that's 5 seconds of me having to take my hands off an instrument or out of the mindset that I'm in to switch over to something else and try to maintain that focus. I don't know if you've ever done it, but a lot of us guitar players specifically play with loops all the time. And sometimes when we're playing on loops, we can play for 5 hours, 6 hours, just playing endlessly without moving or touching anything. And that's where the creativity comes from. So I feel like when you have all of these individual elements that I could just turn, click, turn, click, turn, click, it's way easier to remain in that creative space. And obviously, it's the first one that I've seen that is like this, so it's going to come a long way. But I really want to paint a picture before we dive into what this is doing now and what it looks like in the future for us. And let's talk about this doesn't exist. We're already kind of talking about where we're at now, but even before Cubase and home studios, we talk about it a lot. We talk about the pain that it is, or was, I should say, to go record or write, even if it's all electronic. It was awful back in the day. And I know I experienced that way too much. And I'm not even that old. Like I'm in my late 30s. Like I can't even imagine what it was like to be a studio engineer back in the day with like a Zeppelin coming in for a set, right? How much of a pain that was to happen. But yeah, I mean, that's really where I want to start. I want to start talking about this doesn't exist. Where have we come from, John, in the world of studio recording?
I actually think that this, and I'm going to go backwards when I say how much of a game changer it is, but I actually think that, first of all, number one, I'm buying it. Number two, it's kind of like going from like a hammer and a chisel and carving words into a stone, then going to the ballpoint pen, and then going to a computer where you can just hit a key and it's already like you just type it, right? So, I mean, it's mind blowing to me on so many levels, and I know we'll get into this, but all of the stuff that it replaces, it like you literally have a studio in your pocket. And yes, Corey, you can take that phrase. Thank you very much. Just cite my name at the bottom. But like you literally have an entire studio, like in this VR headset. It's in a box, right? Like we have smartphones or a computer in a little box, and this is amazing. It's a complete recording studio, and we'll get into all the benefits or whatever. But the reason it's so amazing is because going back to, like I said, with trying to record like words on a surface, like the original version of that, right, is trying to write something or carve it in stone. It takes so long to make one character, and it's very crude, right? The right, it's not like fancy handwriting or anything. It's very crude. So if we go back to the very beginning, it's all obviously analog equipment. The analog equipment itself either doesn't, in the very beginning, it doesn't function that well, or it doesn't sound very good. And you have to have exceedingly ridiculously expensive equipment to get really good sounds, right? All those records that we love from the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., mainly before the 80s, but most of those were done on like amazing, huge, expensive studios with like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, like control boards, and it's insane. And everybody has to go to a location. You have to have all the different equipment. I mean, that's just the board, right? Like, just imagine having all the different preamps and all the different microphones and all the stuff that you have to have. It's absolutely insane how much you had to have in those days to make something that's really, really good. Not to mention a person who knows how to, manipulate all the tools and actually use all the stuff to get a really, really useful sound out of it, and then engineer the whole thing. So, fast forward a little bit, and of course, we started to come out with some digital instruments. You can plug a guitar more recently into a computer, especially like keyboards, and we had MIDI that came out, and you can. In the beginning, of course, it was kind of like cheesy sounding, like video game sounding, right? But digital sounds have advanced so much that's what a lot of pros and a lot of artists and musicians only use these days. And now fast forward to what we just saw with this Korg, the Gadget, the VR studio, you literally have all of those tools in a box. It's mind blowing. I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Satriani is obviously one of my idols, hence signed poster behind me. So he's one of my greatest guitar idols, and all the videos of him recording all of his stuff from like Flying in a Blue Dream, right? When you watch all of those archived videos of him playing through these solos, you see, first of all of this equipment surrounding him that is just like, I don't know what any of it does. Like I grew up thankfully in the age where I did a little bit of going to studios and recording, but then I was able to start recording slowly but surely at home studios that were really nice and expensive, but they were still home studios. But I can't even imagine, like, if you were to ask me, what's that thing behind him? Dials? I don't know. Very expensive thing that lights up. I don't know. But you look at that, let alone the process. So you start seeing the process of him tracking a solo, and there's always like 3 guys at the board trying to be like, okay, go now, right? Go now.
Not to mention tape.
Cut, paste, right? Yeah. And just going through, and it made, I guess the best way to say it is, back then it was literally impossible for the average person to do anything like that at all. Like, if you didn't have a ton of money to spend on studio time or buy studio equipment, like, that was it. You were just jamming with your band and nothing would come of it outside of that. So that is amazing to think about back then. But even now, and we'll talk about like now what it's like. But when I think about me sitting down and recording, it's still, in comparison to the thought that this brings, it still feels a bit archaic in that way. Because why? When I load my stuff up, it takes so many gigs of RAM, so much hard drive space, such processing power to do all of this stuff. And when you're talking about it's in a box, like, imagine the processing power of that studio, what was required, all the power, all of the stuff moving. Now it's there. Like, this small thing that is the size of your cell phone, it's just attached to your face, now has the processing power and memory power to handle full compositions with numerous tracks that you can be in real time, moving with no lag, nothing. The ability is just amazing. So now when we think about this, how do you see it being used now? So when you see this Korg Gadget VR, obviously it's not actual instruments yet. We'll say yet as well. I mean, it's only a matter of time before you can bring in an actual guitar into something like that. But when we see that, what does this bring in the realm of possibility for a musician or just an average person looking to play?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. But I think for the average person, it's going to be more of a toy, right? You still are going to have to understand something about music and in general composition or writing to be able to create something useful out of it where people might want to listen to it, right? But, I mentioned earlier that I'm going to buy the thing. I am a person who, we used to go to studios all the time, used to record in the big studios. The last album that I made was actually recorded on the same soundboard that they used to record the album Bad for Michael Jackson. Same board. So that thing was hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But now, and I haven't done stuff like that in a while. But now I'm like, well, it reignites my passion to want to go into a studio, mess around, make some music, and do things like that. And I think for a lot of people, because of the difficulty of having equipment, especially home studios, and that's something that I want to ask your opinion about here in a moment, where previously, before the explosion of home studios, we had to go to the studio, and then we started coming out with equipment for home studios, and now we're going to this new thing, which actually might make the idea of home studios kind of obsolete or very different. But we'll talk about the future here in a second. But in general, it just makes it so accessible, and I think that's the key. It's accessible to put on a device on your head and click the on button, right? And you're there. And you can just walk around or turn around or whatever you do and start creating something. And I'm sure you can save files, you can record, you can label songs, whatever it is, but it's just there. And we know that the easier something is for people to do, the more they're going to do it. Like the bag of chips sitting on the table. You're going to eat the bag of chips. No matter how much willpower you have, you're going to eat it.
You've got a chip
exactly,
problem.
Yeah,
is what you're
I had to
telling
tell
me.
you. I had to tell you at some point. But anyway, I think it's really about accessibility and having fun, because hooking up cables, having cables go bad, having cables on the floor, having stuff that doesn't talk to each other, like I remember in the early days of audio interfaces, digital ones, digital audio interfaces, getting that to talk to your computer and sync correctly and have a latency that's like small enough to be able to actually record something. It was almost freaking impossible. It was so annoying, and it cost so much money, right? But again, now it's like you put on the goggles and you're there and you just do it. So I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about, not only using it myself, of course, but just for people in general, because I know how much more music is going to be created with this stuff. Oh, last thing real quick. Sorry.
Yeah.
Also, I mentioned the idea of these virtual instruments getting better and better over the years. What's amazing to me is that not only have they been able to create this virtual studio environment with the actual modules and all the equipment, right? And you can turn the dials and everything, and it feels cool. It feels like you're in a studio, which is really neat. It's a really neat experience. But the dang instruments sound so good. The scents and the sound, they just sound so good. You can really do some serious production work with this stuff.
Yes, I agree. I remember my first MIDI program. You mentioned it earlier. They were terrible. They were so bad. And that was with a home computer. That was like a decently powerful computer back then. And you'd be like, I think this is worthy of being put in Doom. I don't know. It's anything on Windows 95 at this point will be good. And then we started coming out with these VST and MIDI instruments that are actual sampled instruments from other actual literal instruments. So now when I use something like Superior Drummer, I'm using MIDI, but at the same time, it's actual MIDI that is from actual drum sampling, and it's just compressed enough to where it's not taking up a massive amount of space. But the thing I get excited about in the now for this is the start of creativity. I mentioned it before, how any kind of disconnect, you talked about it in the studio, a cable goes bad and it just completely kills your flow. And you could go in and be like, oh, I got this great idea. And you'd go to set up the interface and the latency would be awful. And you'd just be like, forget it. I don't even care now. I forgot what I was going to do. And now when I sit down, I'll record some ideas and I'll just be recording and it'll be almost like a loop. But there's still this element of disconnect where I've got to stop the recording. I got to do another one here. I've got to loop it here. I've got to move here. Where I get excited is being in that space, just you and writing music. And there are no interruptions. I think we mentioned this with Hoshi when he was on, about when I first put it on and I realized that I think there's something here with VR. And that was the moment that when I took it off, like 6 hours had passed. And it did not feel like that. It felt like I was in that thing for 2 hours, maybe max. And I had this feeling of like, wow, that was so real that it's hard to kind of get back to the normal life and where I'm at now without feeling like I'm moving in a weird way, because I got so used to that being the thing. So when we think about that level of immersion now with being creative and writing music, I feel like I'll be using it personally, and a lot of people probably will as well, as kind of like a launching board or springboard for this writing process. Just getting creative, going in and just being in and coming up with something that's like, I think I've got something here that I could work with, and exporting that and bringing that into your normal workspace and being able to work off of that. And a lot of the creative side is already done. You've got chord changes, your progressions are done, your phrases are done, everything's good. It's just now what do I want to add to it and go from there. So speaking of that, you can export all of the files and you can use them. And I actually have one here that I pulled that was like their synthwave version of what they have possible. So I'm going to play this. This is literally somebody went in, they worked through the Korg Gadget VR platform and they exported this. This is 100% made in that platform.
Oh. Pretty incredible.
So there you go. I mean, that's not bad. Well, again, when you think about the fact that that whole thing was done with essentially the processing power of your phone, that's it. And sure, there are certain things that I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, that could be a little higher quality. That could be, but it's like, come on, like really, when you think about what it actually is, none of these instruments actually exist. There are no additional like plugins that are being used. It's just in VR. That's all you're doing. That's all you're doing with that. But what I wanted to mention, kind of bring it back to, is that's how I would see myself in the now using it. Writing something like that, exporting that, putting that into the DAW and being like, okay, what do I want to add here? What do I want to change? But all of that's done in this completely immersed creative space that you could just get it done. And it's probably incredible. So yeah, I'm definitely checking it out as well. But the big question, the question we always ask ourselves, what the heck does this mean for the future of stuff? I think you kind of teased it a bit, the idea of it starting to be in the brain always and maybe not needing studios and all that stuff. But let's talk about it. 5 to 10 years, we're seeing this now. Not talking specifically about where does Korg Gadget VR go in 5 to 10 years, but where do studios go in 5 to 10 years? What do you think this does for them?
Instead of studios, I'll address the studios, but actually the first place my mind goes is I'm wondering what's going to happen to the sales of general instruments, like keyboards and things like that. And the reason why I say that is because most people by volume, statistically, most people that play music aren't professional musicians, right? So why does, Joe Schmo go into or little Johnny go into the Guitar Center or the store and play around with the keyboards? Like, why does he buy something like that? It's probably not to play in a band and make money doing shows and play at bars and things like that. Are there those people? Of course. But those are the few, right? The few people actually go do that professionally and make money at it, and that's their thing. Other people just want to be entertained. And I would be willing to bet, or I would even argue, that most people, by, again, majority, don't even want the experience, or they're not even looking for the experience of playing a physical keyboard or physical drums or something like that. They actually just want to be able to play some kind of music and express themselves in general and just have fun with it because they like music. And it's cathartic. It just feels good, right? So I would say that for the people like that, I could totally see physical instrument sales actually declining because this fulfills the need for those people for entertainment. I mean, for me, like if I didn't have guitars and, all the other stuff that of course you tell yourself one day that you need to get rid of all of it. So you sell it all and then you end up buying it all again. So if I didn't have all that stuff, I don't know if, like, I don't know if I would want to need a keyboard. I mean, you can make the sounds, and if you're not a piano player, like you can make all the sounds and all the stuff or whatever that you want to do in that platform. And same thing with like a drum machine and whatever else do they, that they have in there. It almost feels like the idea of a home studio in general is going to actually segue to this.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree too, and I think that there are elements that even those that like a physical instrument, we will be able to overcome that with certain technologies as well. Good example. I made the joke about playing Mud Runner, but when we think about the fact that I am so nerdy that I have like the wheel and it's like the pedals and the clutch and the shifter and everything, right? But when we think about playing something like that, and when I play that game, it's just regular. The wheel is as is. But then you go to some of the racing games that have come out recently, and there's forced feedback on the wheel. And you just have this feeling of like you're actually driving it, because as you're hitting all of these pockets, your wheel's jerking around and going through. And then you go back to playing something that doesn't have that, and it's like, this sucks. Like, what is this? What happened? I see that being solved with actual like physical things like gloves, something that you're putting on, so you could actually feel like you're making physical contact, but you're not. And I think that's something we're kind of missing as musicians in VR and the digital space right now, is that sometimes, man, if I saw my hands being used on like an Apple Vision Pro and I went to play a piano, sure, cool. But at some point I want physical contact, or at least the perception of physical contact. But that's just like, that's nothing. Like, they've handled the massive amount of work, which is the VR studio and recording space. Now they're just, they want their hands to feel like they're pushing something. Fine. That's no big deal. So I think certain changes are going to happen as they go through. But for me, yeah, I look at the history. I look at where we came from, which was going to the expensive recording studio or having one and spending a ton of money. This big boom of, I'd say in the last 3 years, I'd say 80, 90% of the albums and songs you're listening to just recorded in somebody's office or bedroom, because now everybody's able to do it just right from here with everything that they have easily. And I think about that transition, and that happened beautifully. That took off. Obviously, nobody really does recording time unless they have to at this point at a studio. So for me, I just see it as another one of those transitions potentially. Thinking of us starting here where we're at now, which is recording at home. Well, the next thing is easily that you don't have to be at home. You don't need all this equipment. So like, let's remove that. Let's be in this new space. So I do think it's definitely going to be a game changer in the sense of how we compose. Do I think it's going to replace the full setup in the next 5 to 10 years? Probably not. I don't think completely. And I think there'll always be, just like people with vintage instruments, there'll always be people recording on tape. Even 50 years from now, there'll be people that are like, this is the way to do it. I actually have a friend that we call Aski, Aaron, and Aaron does all of his stuff on tape still, because he's like, it's chef's kiss. It's way better. You got to go this way. So there are still those people, but the majority, the majority are going to go for what's accessible, what's easy, and what allows them to just feel like they created really cool stuff that they're excited to share. And this already is doing that. And I'm excited to see where it goes for integrating instruments, physical instruments, if you can, or making the experience of actually playing in VR a little more lifelike, so that it's feeling like you're a little more in touch and immersed in that way. But it's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. There you go. I don't even know if you had a question. I just went. And I ranted and I rambled. So
good,
off
man.
to you. There you go.
I'll rant a little bit. No, I think one of the biggest things I think that's positive about this to me is that the VR space so far has been mainly about games, right? It's the early days. And when somebody thinks about putting on their VR headset, or they even see a commercial about it, unless it's the Apple Vision Pro, then it's about a game, playing golf, playing hockey. I don't even know if there is a hockey VR game. There probably is. But it's about the idea of entertainment, right? But I love to see this transition, and this is immediately what I thought when we saw the inside of this virtual studio, is that we're making the transition now from games to tools. And that's when VR things are starting to will take over, not necessarily take over and crowd out other things. What I mean is they will start to become more legitimate in terms of like everyday use. Well, I'm going to use my VR like they show in the Apple Vision Pro commercials. I'm going to use my VR for doing the spreadsheet or playing these drums or in this case, going to the studio and actually recording. Like if I'm a musician, I would use the crap out of this thing, right? I mean, I'm still going to use the crap out of this thing. So like it's just it's really exciting to see the direction specifically within the music space of music-based VR applications taking the role of a tool. Like I'm going to have this thing in my quote studio, which the studio is in the thing. That's ironic. But it's like I'm going to have this piece of equipment, basically. It becomes a piece of equipment that I use to write my music or to play my music or whatever. And that's really fascinating to me.
And I would even say that what we haven't discussed, and I'm sure would be an entire other episode, is the combination of all of these as well. So we can think of these as their own thing, right? We have this VR, you're completely immersed in the VR. It's in VR, it's not AR at all. From Korg, which is great. It's wonderful. But then you have Apple Vision Pro coming out and being really focused on like the AR side of things and making it a part of your life and your world. Well, at some point, those two are going to combine. So we're going to be able to have something like Korg, that space you just saw, in your home. So, you know, sitting down in your office that isn't set up to record and doesn't have all the equipment that I spent way too much money on, and allows you to be like, you know what, I want that synth on the desk here. I want that synth on the desk here. I want the monitor here. I want that. So what I really like about it is that Korg isn't going out there right now trying to do that, but they're doing something that will eventually go into that, combining the other technologies that exist, especially because we know their original Korg Gadget, not the VR, was very heavily designed with iOS and Mac in mind. So when you start aligning those, it's pretty cool and clear to be like, that wouldn't be bad to have what I just saw, but it's in my space. That's pretty neat. So yeah, I think that we've predicted it. We win. We are the winners.
That's why we made the podcast.
But yeah, it's really just amazing. And we'll make sure that we put all the sources, including just directly from Korg, all the demos, all the videos that we watched here, as well as a bunch of different audio samples from it in there as well. But I expect to see not just Korg doing this. I expect to see a lot of others. So we're still waiting to hear from companies like Cubase, like Logic, like all of these other people that are seeing the trend happen. And I'm sure it'll happen here in the next few years, if not a lot sooner, that happens. So yeah, let's go through some closing thoughts after seeing all that, John. What
I think in general, like I said, I really do think this is the invention of a computer type moment. When I used the analogy earlier of going from trying to write in terms of chiseling, a hammer and chisel and chiseling some characters into stone versus then going to the ballpoint pen, which is what we had when we developed digital instruments for the first time. And then now we're going to the equivalent of a computer where you can just hit some buttons and the words appear on the screen. And I think this is going to be a game changer for so many reasons, a lot of which we talked about today. But for the average person, well, clearly for the professionals, this is going to change the game because they can probably get started in VR in general and maybe make some tracks or some bass tracks, or even some scratch tracks or whatever for people to play with. But then the average person who's in music just because they love music, they don't want to do it professionally necessarily, or even if they're trying, but it just makes it so much more accessible to them to not only have the experience of going into a studio and turning knobs and all that kind of stuff. That's really fascinating and cool for a lot of people, but they can actually do it and just play around and have fun and get into music more and make kind of their own music. And I also would say one last thing is about this, the fact that it's in VR allows you to escape into this musical control room, if you will. And I would say probably 100% of the musicians I've ever played with, recorded with, talked to, etc., you want to have a good environment to play in, right? That's why you see pictures, videos of studios, or you go to a concert and there's always cool lights and things like that, because the vibe, the feeling, it has to be something that's conducive to you, having that inspiration that you want to play. And I think it's so cool that this gives people the ability to even sit in a storage room and escape into that magic, musical creative space. I just think it's such a huge game changer, and I'm really excited to try it out.
Yeah, one thing we didn't mention too that comes to mind is back when these things were where you just go buy it, right? You go get a synthesizer. It's super expensive. So, of course, you have the ability to just play with one here, but it almost gives you that ability to like learn it and try before you buy as well. Just because I just saw one of the people I really, really like as a musician, Misha Mansour, is now getting into this kind of like modular way of playing and getting all of the old school synths as well and soundboards. And it just makes me look at his photos of all this new equipment he got. And I'm just like, man, that's a lot of money. And I have no idea how to use any of that. But now you could just hop in there for X amount of money and be like, okay, I can see myself picking up one of these. Let me learn it. Let me see if it's something I can get into. I think the education side is great. The other funny thing that I thought of before we move on and conclude is you don't break things. That's also
a good
nice.
plus.
So that
is a plus.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about like breaking off one of those knobs on accident and then going, great, wonderful. Get the crazy glue, I guess. But yeah, it's just all really amazing things, and I'm excited to get in there and try it and see what happens from here. But yeah, so let's talk about the fact that if you're not subscribed, subscribe. I'm just gonna leave an awkward pause. That's as awkward as it gets. It's not that long of a pause. But make sure you subscribe. We see you out there. Keep commenting. I'm interacting with everybody there as well. We appreciate you for doing that. And John, as always, it was a pleasure, an honor as well, my friend. And we will see all of you next time on the Future of Music podcast.